Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about William Shakespeare's play, Henry IV, Part 2. So I've done a video on Henry IV, Part 1. This is the follow-up to that play. I'm reading this in the Norton Shakespeare, and one of the things that the editors talked about in the introduction to this is nobody's quite sure why Henry IV Part 2 exists. It's not clear whether Shakespeare always intended for there to be two parts to this, whether it was originally supposed to be one play and there ended up being too much material, so he broke it, or whether he had a bunch of other random stuff that didn't really sort of he sort of went through his scrap ideas drawer and was just like, oh, here's a bit. I don't have any other play that this fits in, so I'm going to shove it into a sequel to Henry IV Part 1. Nobody's 100% sure what the story with Henry IV Part 2 is. It is definitely not as coherent and focused a play as Part 1. Very, very strange balance to this play overall. The play basically picks up right where Part 1 ends. So Hotspur's rebellion has just been put down, primarily with the help of Prince Hal, thereby redeeming him in the eyes of Henry IV, his father. But Henry IV Part 2 picks up with a new rebellion springing up. The Archbishop of York, Northumberland, who is Hotspur's father, but who didn't actually show up to help out with the original rebellion, even though he said he was going to. He is supposed to take a role in this, but he gets talked out of it, sort of. He gets provisionally talked out of participating by his wife and Hotspur's widow. And so he ends up going to Scotland and basically sends word, hey, I'm going to Scotland, but when you guys start winning, you just let me know and I will be there. Don't even worry about it. If you lose, listen, it was great knowing you guys, but you know. So the whole first portion, if we think about sort of high plot, but really this is not broken up like a high plot, low plot type situation, right? Because in most Shakespeare plays, the high plot takes up the majority of the time. Here, it almost feels like the low plot, which really centers on Falstaff, takes up more of the time or does more work. But if we think about the rebellions as the high plot, the first roughly half of the play is focused on the rebels. Harry, so in this version, Prince Hal, later to become Henry V, is primarily called Prince Harry. So I'm going to call him Harry in this video. Henry IV, I will refer to as Henry. That's the distinction here. It's not quite as confusing as the three Henrys of Part 1, but Harry basically only shows up a tiny little bit. He has a scene where he and Poins are hanging out, and basically Harry's like, oh, Poins, nobody knows the real me. I'm really sad that my dad is sick and probably going to die, but I can't, tell anybody that or weep publicly or whatever, because then people will either think I'm a hypocrite because I live this sort of roisterous, riotous tavern life, or they will think that I am not sufficiently manly or whatever it is. And Poins is just like, yeah, bro, that's tough. I have no advice for you. I am literally just here for you to say this too. And then the only other instance in the first, I think, entire half of the play, as I recall, that Harry shows up is he and Poins hear that Falstaff is going to be having a tavern dinner, and they decide they're going to go undercover. So these two people that Falstaff knows quite well, their plan is basically to just put on waiters' outfits, and he won't recognize them, and he will say insulting things about them, and then they can beat him up. That's the whole plan, and that's what happens. King Henry shows up a little bit, and he's basically just like, oh, these rebels, they're so bad, I don't like it. Send the army out to go get these rebels, because I don't approve. The rest of it, the high plot in the first roughly half, maybe the first 3 acts or so, is basically just the rebels being like, we think that it might not be a great idea to challenge Henry's army with the limited amount of forces we've got here, but probably he'll divide his army, and so we'll be fine. He's got rebellions going on in Wales, he's got a war in France, so he probably won't send his whole force against us. Now, that's a really important bit, because one of the big things about this play, this is a play fascinated by epistemology, and I do want to talk more about that, but keep that notion in your head, right? That these nobles are sort of divided between, this is probably a stupid thing to do, but probably Henry will do some stupid things, so we'll get away with it. We're going to just assume that his force is too big for us to deal with, but also within 50 lines, we're going to assume that we can take them. So that's going on. In the second half, the rebellion is defeated. Actually, Prince John, Harry's brother, basically is just like, yeah, man, on my word as the prince, the king, my father, will definitely address all of your demands. You guys just go disperse your army. We'll get drinks. It'll be a whole thing. The rebels then do that, at which point John is like, arrest these motherfuckers. Oh, you got tricked. I said we would address your concerns. I didn't say we would give you what you want. Now you're getting executed. So John wins the war in this one, and everybody's just like, yeah, well, good enough. Like, it is not at all, like, he does, from the perspective of not getting a bunch of people killed, he does substantially better than Hal did in part 1, and people are basically just like, yeah, good work. Don't care about that anymore, because attention then turns in the second half to Henry IV, who is sickening for his end. He dies within the play, but before he dies, Harry shows up and he's like, oh, I am very sad that my father is going to die, because I am actually a decent human being despite my roisterous, riotous tavern life. And there is this bit where Henry goes to sleep. Harry is there with him. The crown has been sort of put on a pillow to the side of him, and Harry thinks that his father is dead because he puts a feather in front of his mouth, and he's not breathing enough to stir that feather. And so Harry is basically like, crown, your weight has killed my father. It has driven him to his death. Now I need to take it on myself. So he puts the crown on, he goes out. He goes to a different room. Henry wakes up, because he's not dead, and he's like, where's my fucking crown, son? Fucking bring it back. And then he calls all the other nobles in, and he's like, Harry is trying to kill me. He wants me dead so that he can have the crown, because he's a fucking greedy little selfish son of a bitch, and I don't like him. Harry then comes back in. He's like, hey, Dad, you're not dead. That's awesome. I'm so happy. And Henry's like, you're a greedy little son of a bitch. You can't wait for me to die. How about you just shut the fuck up? And then Harry's like, listen, bro, it isn't like that at all. I was real sad. And I thought the crown was weighing you down into your grave, so I took it away. And Henry's like, well, that seems legit. I totally understand, and definitely I'm not suspicious anymore. Also, now I'm dead. And so Harry is going to get crowned Henry V. Falstaff hears about this. He's out in Gloucestershire, and so he rides back to London because he thinks, and actually I'm going to talk about this scene as well. I'm going to talk about this scene now because I actually think it's a pretty heartbreaking scene for me because I quite like Falstaff. And I think we're meant to like Falstaff. And I don't know, like, this is a tough scene for me to read because I think we're also meant ultimately to like Henry V. I don't really like Hal, and I don't really like Harry. So in part 1, he's Hal. In part 2, he's Harry. I don't really like Prince Henry before he becomes Henry V. Like, I'd have to reread Henry V to determine whether I like him in that play, but I don't really like him. I don't really like Hal. But I do like Falstaff, even though I recognize that he has many, many, many massive character flaws. But we get this scene where Falstaff is there, and he has these friends around him. He's sort of built his own mini court of his followers, and he believes that Hal is his friend, and that Hal, now that he is king, will benefit Falstaff in some ways. He will elevate Falstaff's position, he will provide honors, he will ensure that things are good for Falstaff. And he genuinely believes this, because I think he genuinely has an affection for Hal, as problematic as that affection sometimes is, and as uncertainly as it's expressed. I think he genuinely likes Hal, and he thinks that Hal genuinely likes him. And so Falstaff shows up at the coronation, and he tries to talk to Hal, and this is what happens. King Harry, he's now listed as King Harry, says, "My Lord Chief Justice, speak to that vain man." The Lord Chief Justice, who has had many run-ins with Falstaff before, says, "Have you your wits? Know you what 'tis you speak?" Falstaff says, "My king, my Jove, I speak to thee, my heart." And then this is Harry's response. "I know thee not, old man. Fall to thy prayers. How ill white hairs become a fool and gesture. I have long dreamt of such a kind of man, so surfeit-swelled, so old and so profane, but being awake I do despise my dream. Make less thy body hence and more thy grace. Leave gormandizing," which is gluttony. "Know the grave doth gape for thee thrice wider than for other men. Reply not to me with a fool-born jest. Presume not that I am the thing I was, for God doth know, so shall the world perceive, that I have turned away my former self, so will I those who kept me company. When thou dost hear that I am as I have been, approach me, and thou shalt be as thou wast, the tutor and the feeder of my riots. Till then I banish thee on pain of death, as I have done the rest of my misleaders, not to come near our person by 10 mile. For competence of life I will allow you, that lack of means enforce you not to evils. And as we hear you do reform yourselves, we will, according to your strengths and qualities, give you advancement." Then to the Lord Chief Justice he says, "Be it your charge, my lord, to see performed the tenor of our word. Set on." And he has Falstaff, well, the Lord Chief Justice has Falstaff sent to prison. It is, for me, and partially I think the reason that I find this scene so heartbreaking and so difficult to read is because I have a very vivid memory of Orson Welles' The Chimes at Midnight, which is Welles' sort of amalgamation of Falstaff material. And this scene in there, the I know thee not, old man scene, is so brutal. Partially because Wells is such a good actor, and as Falstaff, when he says, "My king, my Jove, I speak to thee, my heart," he has this joy of friendship and anticipation of this reunion with Hal. Even, I think, apart, and maybe this is me romanticizing Falstaff, but even apart from the question of advancement or getting material rewards from Hal's kingship, I think there is a sense in which Falstaff genuinely likes Hal, and he thinks they are true friends. And Harry basically says, "I don't like you. I have never liked you. You have always been bad for me, and I reject you." And I think it's very, very rough. I think it's very, very cruel in that moment to this guy. And again, Falstaff, again, has a number of massive character flaws. He's a thief. He's a glutton. It's not clear that he employs any sort of like sexual violence or something like this, but he's lecherous. He drinks too much, etc., etc. But again, I think it's a brutal moment, and on the one hand, I get it from an early modern perspective. We are supposed to see this as part of the movement from Hal, the guy who frequents taverns, participates in petty thefts, drinks too much, etc., etc., brings shame on the name of the royal family, to the good King Henry V. This is part of his arc. But I can't help but seeing this as a step backwards for Hal, for Harry, for Henry V. I cannot help but seeing this as cruel, brutal public humiliation of someone who has been his friend.